what was your reaction to the news of what was going on with Venezuela this morning?
I think it was really shocking and unexpected. I know we've been building up in Venezuela with the tensions that have been rising with the other things that are going on, but I think it was really unexpected from my perspective to wake up this morning to the fact that the president had gone in and um, had dropped bombs and kidnapped Maduro and his wife.
And when did you first hear about what had happened?
I heard about it first thing, so I'm, kind of a news junkie. So first thing this morning, I'm getting on my social media to see what's going on, and that's when I saw the notice and went out and did some reading on it, and just again, um, I'm really surprised and really disappointed that that the White House has chosen to take this direction.
And of course, you were expanding on it a little bit there. Talk about your sort of stance on what took place and your feelings about it.
Well, so I mean, quite honestly, it's unconstitutional because war has to be declared by Congress. The president can't do that. So taking a ground war into a foreign country is unprecedented and just unconstitutional. The other concern for me is that there's no clear strategy. You know, they've gone in and my concern is this is going to be another situation like Afghanistan or Iraq, where we have gone in and removed their leadership. And as usual with anywhere else in the world, uh, a vacuum in a leadership position, particularly that high up, is always going to cause conflicts. So now it's, who's going to go into power, and are they going to be on our side? Is it going to be worse? And how long are we going to be able to, how long are we going to have to maintain order in Venezuela?
And as you were talking about their leadership being one of the main concerns, talk about the statement, of course, from Trump about running the country in the meantime until that change of power is able to take place for them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that it really harkens back to Afghanistan and Iraq, that was the plan there. And I think all that this has really done is destabilize the entire region. Even countries that were previously on our side or countries that we were working with have condemned this action overnight. So that's a real concern for the whole region.
And another one of the major talking points that I've seen, and of course, not just with the leadership of the nation, but also the resources, as we've seen. One of the things that Trump mentioned was the tapping into the reserves in Venezuela. Talk about the use of that and your stance on, of course, the use of those resources there.
Yeah, I think that that's part of one of the reasons that he actually went into that area is for those resources. And it is, again, I think it's kind of disgusting to go into a country just for their oil when, we're not having a shortage, right? I mean, Trump says we have less than $2 gas. So why on earth would we need the oil from Venezuela if we're doing so well?
And you've touched on it a little bit, of course, the legality of such actions.
Mhm.
Talk about your opinion on that and what you feel and why you feel that way.
So I'm again, I don't want to keep saying I'm shocked and amazed and horrified and all of those things, but it's, the Democratic Party is strongly condemning this uh, this maneuver, and I stand with the party on that this is absolutely a violation of the War Powers Resolution, and Trump acted without consultation of Congress, or not authorization or consultation of Congress. So that to me says pretty much everything we need to know. This was the wrong move at the wrong time.
And one thing I've heard about that, the lack of consultation, of course, that's still being discussed and figured out as to what happened with that. But I've
Mhm.
heard some say, of course, uh, it's his right to take the action, and talking with Congress could give some buffer time and maybe not allow them to go through fully with their actions that they wanted. Talk about, that stance of he didn't necessarily need to go through Congress, and it was okay to act when he did.
Okay, so again, I think that that's unconstitutional. We're not able to put troops on the ground in other countries uh, without their permission, and doing so is a declaration of war, and that is again, the last thing this country needs right now is a war. We've got enough going on in the US right now that I think it really puts us in a bad position from the terms of the way that this is being viewed from around the country, and around the world, because this is bigger than just the US now. Um, so that really is concerning.
And of course, with this being very early on, of course, we're still learning more as the day goes on.
Yes.
But what is sort of next, and what do you hope to see next?
Well, what I hope to see next is that Trump will snap to some common sense and consider pulling, at least, consider not adding more troops into Venezuela. Let's start talking about what our strategy is in the area. Why did we go into Venezuela? Was it just the oil, just the resources? I know he's mentioned several times with Maduro that he is a drug dealer, and or is allowing that to happen in Venezuela, and that is one of the things that he's been fighting back. But then when he pardoned another man who he allowed into the United States, who was also a narco trafficker.
And just wrapping up, is there anything else that you feel is important to add that you wanted to add, or is important to clarify in this time that you feel is necessary that I've not asked about?
Yeah, I feel like at this point we need to demand transparency and oversight. There needs to be an investigation into the decision-making process, and we need to ensure that we are acting with the full authorization of all the appropriate parties, is would be my closing message. And just, we can't just go out and do things willy-nilly with no without going in and, again, having an exit strategy. You can't just go and attack a country and kidnap their leaders and walk away.